All right, we're going to kind of review the use of masks on Photoshop. And as we start every project, we want to make sure we have the right settings before we begin. You should be able to retitle your work. Make sure you're under pixels and not inches. I have the width is 800 and the height is 600. I am in a landscape orientation, 72 resolution, PPI, and I'm going to start with a transparent background. Make sure you have all those settings before you begin. If you are in inches, you're just going to crash and it's going to glitch the whole time. All right, I'm going to create 2 layers to try to explain how we did this. First of all, you want to get your paint bucket, which is over here. The gradient tool and the paint bucket are the same. So if you double touch that twice, it'll pull up which option you want. I'm going to start out by making that layer blue. Then if you come over here to the plus, you'll add a new layer. I'm going to switch this color right here just by pushing these little arrows so that the yellow is on top. Make sure that my paint bucket is selected and that one's going to be yellow. If you take your layer and highlight it and you can move your layers and whatever is at the top is what you're going to see. Now, a lot of times students are going to want to use an eraser to take away things, okay? And I'm able to see that layer below, but I'm using an eraser. I can't ever go back and fix that. If I make a mistake, I have to constantly hit this little arrow to fix my mistakes. So what we want to use is the mask. You want to make sure that your mask is highlighted. That way you're not permanently changing the layer, you're only changing the mask. And the mask is much easier to edit without permanently deleting or changing the original image. So make sure that the blue highlight is around the mask. And let's look at our brushes. So if you double tap on the brush, you're going to see a lot of choices of brushes. And I do want you to spend some time kind of exploring those choices. I'm going to choose the hard round first. And you want to think about the size of your brush. And you want to do black. Let's make one color black. And then let's make that gray white. Okay. So after you have gotten the size of your brush the way you want it, I want you to click the box below the size and it'll say opacity. For this purpose, I want you to go all the way up to 100. Opacity talks about how transparent something is. And if it's 100% opacity, it means you cannot see through it. All right, and then these are just different settings for your brush. All right, so I'm painting. My layer is white. Okay, so I'm gonna paint with the black brush. But what happens is when I paint with black on top of the white, it basically reveals what's happening underneath the layer, so you can see the second layer below it. Let's pretend I'm going to pick this little box with the lightning bolt. If I click invert, it changes it. The layer is now black and I painted with white. So here's kind of how to remember this. White reveals, black conceals. It's kind of like if I was in a dark room and I turned on the light. So we're going to pretend the layer mask is black because you can't see and it's dark, and you're going to turn on the lights and paint with the white. You're revealing the layer. If I flip them, it's the opposite. So you kind of need to know which layer you want to show through. And in a lot of the instances that we're going to use this later, you're going to be using photos. So you're probably going to want some of the photo to show and other parts of the photo not to show. So I want you to spend a few minutes just playing around with the paintbrush tools. I want you to maybe try some different paintbrushes and kind of experiment. I want you to change the size of the paintbrush so you can kind of see how different things work and what they look like. And then we're gonna move on from here in a second. All right, so you kind of have to get to a point where your thinking is a little differently with masks. You're thinking about revealing and concealing and not necessarily painting black and white. Now, I made your backgrounds blue and yellow for a reason. What happens if I don't want the transparency to be at 100%? Now, I could change the opacity to, 50% if I wanted to, or I could do something else. Anybody know? You can change the paintbrush color to gray. So gray is between white and black. So I want you to try and use that. Once you paint that on, you should get kind of a green tone, depending on which, how exact your colors are. This image gives you an idea of how you can manipulate the opacity and what it looks like as a result. All right, there's another tool I wanted to show you about, and I'm going to change this color first back to black. Okay, and then I want you to click on the paint bucket and then push it again. And you see gradient is below that. So with a gradient, if you draw the line on the paper, you're going to automatically get the black and the white transitioning from 100% to 0% opacity essentially. And you can see the layer mask and how it looks like it would be in black and white. But this can do that for the whole image. Now, how I would use this, maybe you would take a landscape and maybe make it gradually change into each other. Okay, so I deleted one of my layers, and I'm gonna bring in two different pictures as two different layers. So I'm gonna push this little box, it looks like the clip art, and I'm gonna take photo, and I'm gonna select this winter image here. You wanna kind of make it the size that you want it, fill that screen. You can always crop it later. And then click done. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm gonna delete this one. If you hit the little three dots, you can edit those. All right, now I'm gonna come over and I'm gonna pick another beachy kind of scene here. I don't think I picked the best images. No, that's not a good one. Let's cancel. Let's pick another one. I put two in here, so let's see. And I think I'm looking at the horizon lines. Do you see when I picked my image? I want to make sure the horizon lines kind of match up. All right, done. Okay, now I'm going to pick add a mask. The mask is highlighted. Then I'm going to come over to the gradient tool. It's selected and I'm going to drag that way. And you can see how it slowly morphs into the other option. Let's see what happens if I drag it this way. So you can kind of see how it can change. So you can play around with that for a minute and try to merge maybe two landscapes together. All right, so now I'm going to show you how to use this with two images. I've got the picture of the girl, and I'm going to bring in a tiger image. And, I kind of do want to see how they are, they line up. Her eyes, I'm like trying to make their eyes evenly spaced. You can change the opacity sometimes with these images, especially on the computer. I know how to do that. So you can kind of put them on top of each other and see how they line up. But I'm just trying to compare that here. I think that's pretty close. So now I got to make sure that, because once you line them up, it looks like it's pretty symmetrical. Okay. I'm gonna, you've got these two images on top, so you're going to add a mask to one of them. And remember, you can invert that mask. And I could just take my brush and let's choose a soft round brush. because the edges are going to be more discreet that way. And I'm going to paint with white so I reveal the tiger image. So let's see how that works. You know, see how the soft edge brush helps the features of the face and the features of the tiger kind of merge into each other a lot better. Now I can go back. Let's say I want to do the gradient. You can kind of play around with it that way too. That's kind of cool. Let's see what happens when so white reveals. And then if I want to switch my brush to black, I can cover this stuff up from the background. What's the opacity? That's hardness. Opacity's 100. So you're going to spend some time just playing around with those tools and figuring out how to merge maybe two faces together. Okay, I want to show you the difference between using a gray to blend and using the opacity. So right now I have it on white, and if I were to paint in here, I'm revealing what's underneath. Now I have a soft brush, so the edges are kind of more softer, not as harsh, doesn't look like I'm cutting out. But if I change the opacity, you know, let's say I want to slowly blend it and I think, oh, I'm going to change the opacity. Well, the problem with that is it's kind of like using a spray can. If I paint over something with the opacity at 50% and I keep going over that same area, I'm adding layers of paint, or I'm adding layers of that image, and it's never going to be consistent. Where if you choose the gray instead of changing the opacity, you're going to have a more exact value, I guess, of the color. So every time I go over it, it stays the same no matter what. So that is something that I would encourage you when you start merging these images together and you're trying to make them blend better, to use the gray tones instead, so that you can get a better blend. All right, now I kind of want to go back and maybe bring back her eyes. And I'm going to make it smaller. I'm going to make sure the hardness is there, the opacity is there. So I might just want to bring in her eyes. I don't know if that's going to... That's kind of why you have to make sure your images are... All right. All right, you guys keep playing around with the tools and just get more comfortable with them and how you want to blend things together. All right, so I'm going to use a new tool called the Quick Selection tool. The first thing I'm going to do is bring in another photo. And when I do that, it's going to automatically add a layer. Before you can move forward, you've got to make sure that you've got the size the way you want it. So I'm kind of thinking about the size of her head and how big it would really be and where it would position itself over her face. I'm going to click done. Now, when you go over to this little paintbrush with the lasso, you're going to touch it twice and you're going to click Quick Selection. I'm going to outline. I'm going to kind of start touching it, and the Photoshop already automatically knows what you're trying to cut out. Now, it's best to find an image that has clear edges around it. If you're doing a dark image and there's a dark background, then you may need to try to find another image. And if you're Googling something specific, you can always put like transparent or clip art added to whatever you're trying to look for, and usually you can get some pretty good images. All right, now I'm going to go and refine edge. Marching ants is just how it looks. You can change the way it's kind of presented as you're editing. If you're doing something with fur, you may want to change the edges of the objects. That's something that's helps with the texture and shifting the edge. You can see how the edges will shift in and out depending on what you're cutting. And then when you go to output, you want to create another layer mask, okay? I'm going to click done, and you can see that it's already added another mask and it's already been cut out and added to her face. Okay, so I wanted to show you how I went into the website and typed in just kitty transparent, and all these images are with transparent backgrounds. So I can save it to my camera roll and then bring it into my Photoshop. All right, so I'm gonna go into my camera roll and find that image, and it's a little small. That's okay. It kind of looks funny right here. And then I can do the quick select and try to cut it out. And since the background is pretty solid white, it should be a little easier. Now I do want to show you something about refining the edges. If you look over here to the negative and the plus, you can add, or let's say you got too much and you need to bring it in a little bit, and you can take away. So using the plus and the minus and changing the size that you're working with may be a good way to edit how you're cutting things out. I'm gonna check feather, and I'm gonna kind of shifting the edge helps cut it, and you can see how it changes. So I'm gonna go in a little bit with it. So I don't wanna go too much. Feather that edge a little bit. Put it as a layer mask. And now it's thinking. I may have to wait a minute until it stops spinning and then click done when it's highlighted. All right, so there you can see him. He's cut out. Starting to look more like a surrealist collage like we did with the magazines, but this time we're doing it with Photoshop. So that's basically what I want you to do. I want you guys to create a surrealist collage using this Photoshop and the layers and the quick selection tool. And so you're gonna wanna maybe come up with a theme and get at least 5 different images that you can combine together. One image should probably be a background. Maybe you have a main subject, and then maybe you have a few supporting parts or supporting images to kind of enhance your final image. And then I want you to turn in your image by uploading it into Google Classroom.